Welcome to Doing the Most, the series where we talk about the misadventures of entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Georgie, execution strategist and serial entrepreneur. This series is here to get real about what entrepreneurial life truly looks like. We are driven, persistent, hardworking, ambitious. We are human, and these are our stories. Welcome back to Doing the Most, the misadventures of entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Georgie, and for this week's episode, we have Kait, who is an entrepreneur, and she focuses on sex education and sex wellness. So we're going to get a little spicy on today's episode. Kait's going to share her journey and her misadventures during that journey. So Kait, can you give us a little bit of your background, who you are, kind of what got you to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So hello, everyone. Like was said, I am an entrepreneur and a sex educator. And honestly, to be really blunt, I really stumbled into this. So at this point, my company is called Passion by Kait. We're an educational platform for pleasure and sexual freedom. But the journey here, I just literally someone on my college campus was selling sex toys through one of those MLMs and was like, I think you'd be really good at this. And I basically, after about, a year of being a tease and saying no, was like, okay, why not? I need some extra money. Let's do this. I did not at the time. I really went into it thinking like, oh, this is a way to make some quick cash. Great. I did not foresee it completely altering the course of my life, the course of my career. At the time, I was dead set on going to medical school. I got in, I applied, I got in. I ultimately decided not to go and to focus instead on public health and sexual wellness. And so that's kind of where we got to. And it was a lot of, quite frankly, saying yes to opportunities before I felt ready. And just someone would be like, oh, do you offer this? And I was like, Google. Yeah. And last year we rebranded, shifting from being, again, more of a kind of coaching brand to being more of this educational platform, because for the past 10 years, that's what I've just been seeing as is such a need, is a place where people can go and get trusted information, resources, and just the affirmation, quite frankly, that they're normal, that their desires are okay, and the confidence to speak up and ask for what they want.
Awesome. Love that. And I think a little part of that story was missing. What kind of college were you going to?
Catholic college.
Oh, okay.
little bit missing.
I was
at a Catholic
college. A little important.
Got into a little spot of trouble. But actually, I look back and I have to laugh, because even so, for the 2 years after I graduated, I was living just on the other side of the state, and it was Massachusetts. So we're not talking Texas, right? And so for 2 full years after I graduated, I would go back one weekend a month to do events. And most of the residence life staff knew. Like a lot of people knew, and it was very much like don't ask, don't tell. And like I was good friends with all the resident assistants, with all the RAs. So if they were doing rounds, they would let me know who was on. And if it was like someone who was a little stricter who was on, we would, put stuff away before they came through. So I look back and I was like, we had this kind of whole underground thing going on.
So you were dealing sex toys.
Yeah. There you go. That's it. Sex toy dealer. Yes. Kind of. Like I said, we had residence life staff on board, knew, the RAs knew, everyone kind of knew who I was and what I was doing. And a lot of people were just like, well, we can't endorse this. And we're going to tell you that you're not supposed to, but then we're kind of going to just look to the other side, because we recognize we're all educators and we recognize the need for this. So yeah, I sometimes look back and I'm just like, holy shit, I did that. That was a thing. Yeah. I kind of ran like a not so underground, like sex toy ring, I don't know what to call it. And it wasn't without consequences. I did lose one of my leadership positions through campus ministry, for volunteer work, because someone tattled on me. And I to this day don't know who it is, but they felt the need to like tell them, and
they were just mad that their toys weren't working. They were just mad.
Get some. Kesha, one of Kesha's new songs, I think the lyric is like, I love singing "fuck it" on my songs, because the only people who are bothered are those who've never gotten some, or those who need to get some. And I'm like, yes, I Co-signed. So it wasn't without consequences, but for the most part, it was really accepting. And I'm really grateful for that because it's given me a bit more of an optimistic view on this world. And there's, talking about sex, particularly not being a white man with a VC funded company talking about erectile dysfunction medication. There are so many barriers to us as entrepreneurs in this space, with that one exception. Literally, it's very specific. We can't advertise, we can't, there's just so many restrictions. So it feels, I'm grateful that those kind of early formative entrepreneurial experiences were like, you got to work within the system you're in and you got to make it work no matter what.
Love that. And so let's talk a little bit more about, what made you decide to do like the rebrand to more education. Talk a little bit more, like what are, I know you were selling the toys and you were like doing coaching. What else were you doing? And like, what made you decide to rebrand to more like calling it like sex education? Was it just a time? Like what happened?
Yes. So there's a couple of pieces to this. So in 2016, I got really, really sick, and we're getting deep now. 2016, I got really sick. And at the same time, I started working with a business strategist who I also call my personal witch / business dom, because she fills all of those roles in my life. And I think everyone should have a business dom / personal witch / strategist. Like not afraid to crack the whip on me when I really need it and when I'm spiraling, right? And we all get in our heads, right? It's no way not to. And so she's like not afraid to be like, stop. Yes, ma'am. And so one of the first questions she asked me at the time, right? So I'm sick. I'm not really working on my business. I'm mostly homebound. We're trying to figure out a medication regimen that's going to give me my fucking life back. And one of the first questions she asked me was, do you want to be the face of this company? And I was like, no. I was like, I don't. She's like, so we need to start moving away from that. And basically the rebrand took place in drips and drabs over the course of 4 years, to the point that when we actually like relaunched, a lot of people were like, what's the difference? Like, your website's pretty, but what's the difference? Which was a little disappointing, right? Because I was like, no, whatever. But also means that we did it right. It means that because we started by shifting the content and having it be less personal stories and more, here's information that you need. Here's information that's going to actually help you. Because at the end of the day, that's what people want and need, is what I have seen in my work, right? And then basically, late 2018, we started the process of making the visuals on the website match the updated content.
Okay.
And so that was it. It really was a 4-year process. And part of that was because I was healing and not working full time. But the other piece here was, once I got these diagnoses, I realized I needed to have a business that could support me even when I wasn't able to show up, right? I wasn't able to do coaching or counseling in that time period because I was so sick and had to focus on my health. And the nature of autoimmune diseases, knock on wood, I'm in a good place. I hope I stay here for a very long time and live a full life. That being said, there are no guarantees. So I also needed something that's going to support me even when I can't get up and get on the phone with people and do the sex coaching, do the couples counseling. And so that also is behind the rebrand. But that question of, do you want to be the face of your brand? Do you want that more coach lifestyle? And there's no wrong answer. It's no judgment, right? It's, do you want that? Or do you want to be more of, hey, here's this thing I've created that's going to support you in all these different areas? And for me, that, like, as soon as she asked the question, there was no hesitation. I knew exactly what I wanted. And that was that.
And I love that. Like you said, figuring out like what makes sense for you, because everyone is different and every brand is different, and people have the assumption like if you are a lifestyle brand, that means it has to only be about your life, and you can't, there's variations to everything. You can customize and live the life in the way you want to live it. And we had somebody else on the show that was mentioning something called life by design. So like, what is your version of what a good, healthy life looks like, whether it's like, in your work, in your personal life. And that's kind of what your company helps people to figure out, like what specifically in like their sex life, what sex life, what looks good, what feels good, what makes sense for me versus like, TV says we should do this. And
exactly.
I wanted to bring up another point that you mentioned in terms of like the advertising, and let's talk to this a little bit. How do you feel the market is changing when it comes towards like specifically women's healthy sexual lives? Because I know, you know, different brands like Unbound, it was like hell and high water to do any type of marketing. Thinks, even the underwear, like that was like a crazy thing to just get like those ads in the train stations. Like how is that, you know, can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you reflected back around just the idea of life by design, because it's exactly what it is there's no one way to do business. There's no one way to have a good sex life. It's all about what works for you. And a lot of it is just figuring it out for yourself. And no one wants that answer, right? No one wants that, but that's the fucking truth. In terms of the market, you know, I'm very grateful to be living in a time where we are surrounded by so many awesome sex positive, pleasure positive, inclusive brands. It's such a gift. It's such a gift. And also it's bringing to light where all of the issues are. Right? It's bringing to light it kind of, quite frankly, feels like the 2016 election. I kind of hate to go here, but right. It's like all these issues were here this whole time. And all that happened is they just got pushed up from the ground. Right. And that's what this advertising bit feels like. And it's interesting because as someone who's been around for over a decade and who was around before Instagram, right? Like who was running a business. Obviously I've been around. Someone who's had a business for more than a decade. You know, the earliest lessons I got were don't rely on social media, word of mouth, you know. And so it's a really interesting juxtaposition, because these were issues that I was like, well, whatever, that's not how I make my money. So why do I care if I can't advertise? You know? But that being said, I also, again, I get it. Like it's all of these issues, those restrictions have always been there. And now we have companies saying like, hey, this isn't fucking okay. Just because it's how it's always been. It is making it harder for us to do the work we're here to do. And for me, right, like I have to be very particular in the types of support I get, because so many business coaches are like, just do ads. And I'm like, cool, that's great. Do you know anything about the sexual wellness industry? I'm literally blocked. I cannot. And Facebook keeps being like, here's some ad credit. And then they're like, oh, sorry, you can't run ads. And I do have a colleague who did it, and she had to scrub her entire website.
For like every word.
And I'm like, that's ridiculous. So this, you know, the core of the issue is struggling between sex education and explicit materials. But even within that, right, like you have the Kardashians who post explicit shit constantly. But then you have a sex worker doing it, or you have a sexual wellness brand doing it, or you have a fat person doing it, a woman of color doing it, and just like it's like, oh, blocked by, your account's gone now.
Like the little fuzzy, like, do you want to see this content? Click this button, and it's like, oh, okay, sure.
Or their accounts are just getting shut down, right? So even for me, like my Instagram, you know, Instagram claims they don't do shadow banning. They do. They absolutely shadow ban. My account is absolutely shadow banned, right? Unless you fully type in the full account name, it doesn't come up, and it stinks. But for me, again, I'm also like, well, that's not how I've ever really relied on it. So it doesn't feel as impactful to me personally because of that. And also I see and feel deeply that these issues, you know, I'm grateful that we have Unbound and Dame bringing up these issues, and they have, right, because they're backed, they have the capacity and the funding to tackle them in a way that a lot of us who have kind of these self-funded, more mom and pop type companies. And I don't say that to be self-deprecating, but I really think that's a big part of the reason why we're having this conversation now, is because for so long, so many of us were just like, we got to make our money. We're going to do what we need to do to make our money, and that's it. And now there are these companies that finally have the capacity in terms of funding, in terms of staff, to like say, hey, let's do this. You know, they have PR firms that can help them with this. So it's really cool.
Yeah, and I love to see
and frustrating.
That.
But it's a cool time to be living in, and seeing how it's changing, and seeing how these conversations are becoming so much more normalized, and also how much work there is to do.
Yeah, and I think it's allowing also for people to live like their authentic lives, right? You know, because this has been something like was like very hidden, and even with like the different laws from, you know, same-sex marriage being legalized, and that was what, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Like, that's still pretty recent. Like, a lot of these things are so recent, but now, and they're so normal. And when we think just barely 30-40 years ago, things that were absolutely illegal that were within yourself, like, you know, whether it was like segregation of, you know, people of color not being able to use the same water fountains and sit at the same tables, to, you know, same-sex marriages, like, you get like harmed and killed and like beat up. And now it's like, even if you pretend to say anything against that, like, you're totally canceled. And so, you know, it's bittersweet because it took this long, but it's also the fact that, and it's weird that some people are still against a lot of these things, like that the color of my skin or like my orientation does not directly impact the quality of your life. So why are you so upset about these things? I recently saw like an article, I don't know if you're familiar with like the honey pot. It's like a big thing going on with Target now. So could you talk through that?
People are freaking out. I know. But their sales are up, I saw too.
Yeah, so the sales have doubled since. So, but like that, you know, because there's two, you know, subsections of that. One, like feminine hygiene, feminine products, people are having an issue with that. And like the second subset of that is now like the racial card, the fact that she said, you know, I hope for the next Black girl. So now it's like double complicated this one scenario. And how do you feel when you see like things like that on like the media? Like, how do you think would be a better response for people to like take action and like solving these issues?
Yeah, right. And this is where the idea of intersectionality is so important, because like you said, it isn't just one issue here, it's multiple issues. We have the racism, we have the sexism, we have the misogyny that's freaking out. There's also kind of related to this, I forget what state it was arguing that they shouldn't make, I'm blanking on it now, but basically it was around increasing access to period products, and they were worried that people who menstruate would like take advantage and like hoard tampons and pads. And it was like, what?
Yes, I'm gonna buy all the pads.
Exactly. And I think either reducing the tax, like taking the tax off, or making them free in like schools and stuff. And I'm like, listen, if someone's stealing pads from school, they probably fucking need it. So now we're also getting into classes, right? Like class. So like, you know, I just,
okay.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Google it after. And for everyone watching / listening, Google it, because it's ludicrous, but also this person, like this lawmaker, was so serious, right? And that's really scary. And I think, you know, living in New York, being a sex educator, being Unitarian Universalist, I'm constantly in these spaces where like there's a baseline. Even my business groups I'm in right now are all very feminist business groups, and that was intentional. So there's this baseline of shared values. We might not always agree on the specifics. Yeah, I'm thinking of class last night. I'm like, no, we definitely didn't. But there's a baseline of values. And with Honey Pot, it's just like, why? The whole thing is, it blows my mind.
Doesn't make sense.
An issue. Why does it matter if she's encouraging? I actually am blanking on the owner's name, right? Like encouraging other people. Like now, encouragement is seen as a bad thing. Like, okay, I'm really grateful that the sales doubled. I'm grateful that in this case, like the love drowned out the hate, and I think sometimes that's just what needs to happen. But that's also kind of very Pollyanna-ish, I realize. But in this case, I'm just grateful that people were like, no, we're going to just keep buying their products. And their products are fucking awesome. So buy their products. Yeah, I think it's just like, let's just fucking support each other and let's do the messy internal work. And I think that's the other thing is these issues are messy because they're in our DNA.
Yep.
They're in every aspect of society. And one of the greatest things that I return to again and again from a racial justice course I did through church a couple of years ago was this idea of both and. And so like white supremacist culture relies on either or thinking, which is fascinating because, side note, like I have an eating disorder, and with eating disorder, it's all or nothing thinking. And so it's interesting to see like this trickles down into so many places. That's my point. Right? With sex, it's either, well, they finish and sex ends, or I finish, right? Like it's in every aspect of our society. It's either work or pleasure.
Yep.
Right. And then in an anti-racist society, it's this idea of both and, right? And again, it trickles down into wherever the fuck you want to take it, it literally applies. And once you start looking, you're like, oh, it's not nature or nurture. It's nature and nurture.
Exactly.
It's not work or play. It's actually work and play, because when you play and when you have pleasure, it makes your work easier.
Yep.
Right. And so in this case, like, let's just be encouraging. Like, let's just fucking be encouraging and support this little company that is now has a freaking relationship with Target. Like, that should be celebrated. Right. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. We're coming about to the middle of the interview, so I want to talk a little bit about what do you think has been your craziest entrepreneurial misadventure, right? Like the ups and the downs, like, and I think you've mentioned a few, and if you want to revisit one of those stories, that's fine. But like, what do you think is like the craziest entrepreneurial misadventure that you've had so far, that from outside looking in, or maybe something that you haven't publicly shared that you're okay with sharing?
Yeah. So, man, there's 10. I got 10 years of them stored up. I count this as a misadventure because it went against the grain. So I hope that counts.
That counts.
So like I mentioned before, 2016, I was really sick. By the end of the year, I was starting to like we'd found a medication regimen that was helping. And then early 2017, I booked a ton of shit. And in a matter of, by like February or end of January, everything had canceled. I went from having like 10 events to having like, I think maybe one that I was doing for free. And what happened was the emotional piece of the last year and a half of being so sick kind of caught up to me. And I had a just total rock bottom moment. Kind of precipitated by these cancellations and being like, how am I going to do this? Like, I have no business. My health is shit. Like, what is even the point? And so I made the very hard decision to actually take a sabbatical, and I stepped fully away from my company for several months, which even saying it now, I'm like, oh my God, how did I do this? But it's what I really need, right? That need overshot anything else. And I was in a place financially where I had like enough coming in to cover some expenses. I also have a partner who is able to support me during that. And so I want to name those pieces of privilege and support, because this is not accessible to everyone. And I spent 3 months watching TV, crying, journaling, crying, starting physical therapy, crying.
Lots of crying.
There's lots and lots of crying. And when I came back, the first thing I did, the end of sabbatical was marked by speaking at Stanford Sex Week and having my first TV appearance. And so it was such a strong reminder, again, of how stepping away and how is so important, and of how leaning into needs beyond business, right, is so important. And just taking care of ourselves. So it was a wild ride. And those cancellations, it's still, even just thinking about like that time, it was having that many cancellations in that short of a period of time it's devastating. Let's just say it, right? Like,
it's definitely gonna hit you, like, and especially after like the year you've already had, right? And you're like, okay, I'm good now. I have these events coming up, like it's gonna be great. And then it's like, oh, you would have thought.
Yeah. So it was a bit of a wild ride. And I actually recommend sabbaticals to a lot of people, if possible, if they're able to take them. Like, things are really tough. Like, and Alexandra Cranston talks about this too, that how after she had a really bad accident and had to have like leg surgery. Ooh, I got my little prism here.
Oh yeah, you have a nice little glare.
Pleasure. I love my apartment. The sun moves through it, and so at any time of the day, like, it looks like a different place, and I love it. So all right. Well, I'm just gonna have the halo.
It works.
It works. So she talked about, like, for the 12 weeks after surgery, she's like, my job was to heal. And that was it. I was like, yeah. So, and it's right. That's an example. That's a more extreme case for me, where like things just didn't go as planned. I think some of the other misadventures are when you hope something. So that TV appearance, for example, it was amazing. I loved it. I'm so glad I did it. Not much really changed for me as a result of it. I'll be really honest. And I was devastated. And this is where my business strategist kind of had to have a Dom moment and be like, you can't control what happens after. You can only control showing up, doing the work, promoting the work. She's like, you can't control what happens after. She's like, so now you have this, and now we, like, quite frankly, you gotta move on to the next thing. Like, it's okay to be sad, but you gotta move the frig on to the next thing, right? Cracking the whip. So, you know, I had a lot of those moments where I put a lot of stock into like, oh my God, this is going to catapult my business. This is gonna change everything. And then it's like, crickets. Like, right? And those moments, I'll be honest, over 10 years in, still hit me really, really hard. And that is why, again, it's so important to have support. It's so important for me to have pleasure practices to return to in those moments, to reground myself and recenter myself so then I can show up. Right? And I can do the work.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that, like, the fact that you work so hard for like an opportunity, you showed up, you did your best, and then afterwards it's like, and I think in doing that, like, I do that as well too. In doing that, right, we put this opportunity on like a pedestal, and we have such like high expectations for it. When in like, when like looking back, sometimes in hindsight, like, the opportunity was just that was the win. Just getting there was the win, and there wasn't supposed to be anything specific to come after. It was just like, that was the win. Like, that was the high epitome. And then now it's like, okay, now have a new goal, work towards that. And like, that the journey is like the adventure, and like showing up was the win, and like just accepting that. And it was like hard for me to do that, because it's like, you know, opportunities will come out. It's like, I did a TED talk, I did, you know, this speaking engagement, that speaking. It's like, now I'm supposed to be famous, right?
Yeah. You're like,
this
is gonna get easy now. I think one of the best moments for me was at the Blog Her conference a couple years ago, and there's a panel of influencers, and one of them was like a fitness influencer. That's the word. I'm like, what? I was like, the workout steps. And I think I have it in my mind that you hit a certain level and like, you don't have to work so hard anymore.
Yep, it's a lie.
As I say it, I'm like, look at me, right? And I remember sitting in the room. I remember like where I was in direction to the stage. Like, that is how vivid and impactful this moment was, as she talked about the fact that she still is pitching companies every day. And I was like, wait, you don't have like, I just thought companies start knocking down your door at a certain point, begging to work with you. And, you know, to your point, to that point, yet that stuck with me. She was also the influencer, and I love this. She made up an assistant because it gave her the like confidence to pitch places with, and like have a little bit of separation from it, and have it not be so emotional. And, yeah. And even for me, like last year with the rebrand, it didn't go exactly how I wanted it to by what I had in my head, even though many other people were like, that was an amazing one. And I'm like, no, but everything didn't change. And again, I had just started taking so much of my self-worth as my work as my self-worth. And so when one thing didn't go wrong, I took July off. I relaunched in June. July was my worst month that I'd had in like 2 or 3 years. That is how bad, like, I was like, oh, I was on this upward trajectory, and then I relaunched, and crash, awful. That number still haunts me. I know the exact number of income I brought in that month, and it is like, nope. And yeah, you just have to, like, again, at that point, I needed to take some time for myself, and I took August. I took 1 month. I was like, okay, I know I have this like I have some stuff scheduled in August that's definitely not canceling. So I could kind of step back a little bit, and take a month and return to that massive, intense self-care, return to, and business strategist dommed me again in this moment and was like, you need to separate this out, because if every up and down in your business is an up and down in your life and your emotions and your body, like you're fucked, basically. Right?
Basic.
And so for me, it was like, okay, I need to return to some basics. What's a small promise I could keep for myself every day so I could start reconnecting to my sense of self beyond, hi, I'm Kait, CEO.
Yep. And I love that. So I'm gonna bring up a few points that you mentioned. The
first I know we meandered.
No problem. The first one you mentioned was the person that said she like made up an assistant. And guys, take this as a tip. I've made up assistants, and then when I do have real assistants, it's easier to say, hey, this is the assistant stuff. Like, here's the whole curriculum. Here's the email. But then, you know, on occasion, like I've had assistants for like a year, 6 months at a time, but then I could then easily like separate, because before it was just like everyone thinking, oh, they have direct access to me. And like I had to separate from my brain, even though it's like a lot to do with me. I had to let people know, like, you cannot call me at these hours. You cannot reach me. It might say I'm online, but that's not me. That's somebody else tweeting, posting, liking, sharing. It ain't me. So, and even if on times when like things are slower and it is me, it's still not me.
Not me.
It's not me. So just like, that's a big tip for you guys. You know, it doesn't take a lot out of you to create a second email and be your own assistant until you have the income to get an assistant. And if that person has to go, you know, have an assistant, you all need an assistant. And the second thing that you mentioned is just like taking the sabbaticals and taking time away from the business. Because like, you know, in the big picture, 10 years, and then let's say you have been out, right, for 2 years, if you add up all the time, or even 3 years, that still leaves the majority of your business with you in it and going on the cycles and doing the up and downs and fighting the craziness. I recently listened to Oprah's WW tour, where she had like Michelle Obama on it, and she was discussing like, you know, her marriage with Obama and well, Barack, because they're
I know
that's
it's
not
like
his name.
Obama and Obama.
Yeah,
I got you.
Barack Obama. And she was saying that, you know, in every, like, people oftentimes like look at marriage, and she was saying like how authentic she was in her book Becoming, of like the fact they had to go to marriage counseling and like fertility issues. She was saying like if they've been married, I think it was like 40 years, and it's like even if 10% of that 40 years, even like 20% of that 40 years was not good, overall the majority of it has been great. And with life, you're gonna have those ups and downs, and like taking a break when you need to and stepping back, because if you didn't step back and like kind of ran through those, you know, the 2 years, if we add it all up, your company probably would have just ended at like 2 years or 5 years, versus like having the longevity because of those breaks, and like stepping back and having the assistant and having, you know, separating yourself from the brand and just really saying, you know, this is the business and I'm over here. And you know, oftentimes in like early stage businesses, and I've had, you know, folks talk about it a lot, and I've experienced it, where it's like, oh, that's my baby. It's so much of a part of me. If it's not doing well, I'm not doing well. If I'm not making money, if the business is not making money, I can't breathe. I can't think. I can't talk. I'm just, nope. Like your whole status is nope. And so just, you know, learning from early, for those listening out there, like figuring out little ways you could start separating yourself from the business, because the more you get tied into it, you know, once you start growing, people don't want to deal with like an assistant or like another team member or a partner you might have in the business. They just want to deal with you. And there's only enough of you to go around. And if you have, you know, a partner, family life, kids, even if you don't, you want to travel, you want to do anything, you can't even go on vacation, because there's no, you know, people don't want to respect your out of office, like reach out to XYZ on my team. They're like, nope, I want this person. And we've seen people like that. They'll go to a company, go to a store. If Jim is not here, I don't want to deal with anyone else. Like, Jim's on vacation for 6 months. Like, you will not be serviced at this point. So just recognizing and trying to figure out ways early on. So it's, again, a tip is an assistant, and figuring out systems that, you know, to separate yourself. Don't overly put yourself into it, because you have, you know, if you want to grow, you have to separate.
Yeah. And, you know, for me, right, I'm in literally the business of pleasure. So for me, it's always, how can I infuse more pleasure in my work day to day, even in the stuff that isn't particularly fun for me? And then also, how can I make sure that I'm having those pleasurable moments outside of work? So one of the ways I've done this within my work is I've ritualized my bookkeeping, and bookkeeping will probably be the last thing I outsource, because I love it now. Love it. Because what I did was, I'm in this small like accountability group, just very informal. And we started doing Finance Fridays. And so I've created this whole really pleasurable ritual around it. I light a candle, I grab some sort of drink. Some Fridays it's alcohol, some Fridays it's tea, right? Like it just depends on the week. Let's be real, right? I pick like a drink that feels like a treat. I put on some really like nice music. I think they're the one I'm obsessed with. Hold on, I'm going to tell you all, because it's a great playlist for working.
Some money making music, right?
Yeah. And it's actually not, because what I realized for me is that money was such a charged issue that I needed like grounding, like really grounding. So there's a playlist on Google Music or Google Play, whatever the hell it's called Mystical Muses. And it is giving me
I'm gonna write that down. Mystical Muses.
So I usually do like a mellow indie, like, right, like I'm looking at this. So it's like Mystical Muses, mellow indie, winter unplugged, in your autumn sweater. So I choose these like very cozy playlists. I know I love the names on Google Play. I really do. But like, you see the theme there, right? It's like very cozy, very comforting, very grounding music. I light a candle and then I dive in. And in those moments, and I do it almost as a meditation, right? Because stuff comes up. The counting sessions where I've like killed it, I'm like, yeah, I killed it, right? And now I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna like, cool, I did good. That says nothing about me. And that way on the weeks I haven't done as well, right? Where the numbers are not showing, I'm still like it still hurts. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't fully achieved that separation yet. But because I've ritualized it, because I've created a container for it, it kind of stays there, and I'm able to, within that container, ride the waves in a way that I wasn't when I was just like, oh, I'm just gonna like try and do this thing now. So where we can create ritual and where we can infuse ritual with comfort and pleasure, particularly around the stuff that challenges us the most,
love that.
Magic really does happen, right? And like my taxes are, like my bookkeeping is always done now. Because and now I look forward to it. Like Friday afternoons, I do my bookkeeping and I love it. And everyone is thinking I'm insane right now. Like, who is this lady? But I'm just saying, give it a try. And it doesn't have to be bookkeeping, right? Like it can be anything that you do. So from the other one, I will say, because we're talking about misadventures, right? In the spirit of transparency, the one I haven't tackled is follow-up. I hate follow-up. I suck at follow-up. I'm going to just name it, right? I probably have lost, I don't even want to think about the amount of money I have lost because of my hatred of doing follow-up, right? It's the first task I'm outsourcing. So I haven't quite figured it around that yet. But as I'm talking, I'm like, I should just do the same thing. I should just choose a day and do all my follow-up and let that be that. Right? But infusing that pleasure, a coach once shared with me too, we were talking about the session that we were having. She was talking about like the exhale and how the exhale is where we find like our release, but also our release. And also you can't make a sounding exhale without it sounding slightly sexual. If you're listening / watching, go ahead and try it. And you like, even if you giggle, right? Like there's not really a way to do it without our brains coding it as a little sexy. So sometimes I'm like doing emails and just like, yeah, okay, right? And it's so silly, but it breaks you out. It helps to hit like the brakes on your stress. And it just is a moment of like pleasure into a very mundane task. Makes it a little juicy. I'm like, why not? Why not?
Send better emails, guys. Just exhale a bit.
Just have big, deep exhales, slightly sexual sounding exhales.
Just have some Serena Williams, like the tennis, like that's like a big one for folks, like the tennis in the background.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So we're coming to the end now, and the question I usually like to leave the audience with is for the guests to say just one piece of advice or homework or a thing that if they got nothing at all from this episode, which I'm pretty sure they got a lot from, what would that be? What piece of information, advice, task, thing that you want the audience to go out there and do with the knowledge that you've shared?
Yeah. I think it's actually going to go back to that last point of take a part of your business and your work that you resist, you avoid, you put off, and create some sort of pleasurable ritual around it. And key is pleasurable. So you want this to feel good in your body. You want this to have a boundary around it, which is why like lighting a candle at the beginning and blowing it out is so powerful because it's symbolic. But yeah, take that task that you put off. And I'm challenging myself to do this with follow-up. Like I'm being honest because I'm really bad at it. I'm like, I have the Airtable spreadsheet and I don't do it. I'm never going to do it. So like take that task that you always put off, that you always resist, that you hate doing, that maybe you're not very good at. Customer service. Great at it. Not supposed to say that, but it's fucking true. That's why I hired an assistant. And create a ritual around it that is pleasurable. Do you figure it out for yourself? Steal mine if you want. Yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us, Kait. You've shared a lot. Guys, get some pleasure into your life and your work. And we'll catch you on the next episode of Doing the Most, The Misadventures of Entrepreneurship. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Doing the Most. Catch us here next week, same time, same place. If you can't wait, head on over to doingthemost.xyz to stay connected. Until next time, keep on doing.